Olá, caminhantes, peregrinas e peregrinos. Meu nome é Andrea Prestes. Sejam bem-vindos à nossa inspiração de hoje com John Brierley. Nascido na Irlanda, morando na Austrália, cidadão dos Caminhos de Santiago de Compostela. Uma crise existencial o levou a peregrinar nos anos 90 e ele se tornou o mais conhecido autor de guias de língua inglesa das rotas a Santiago. Nessa conversa de hoje, ele conta como foi a sua jornada pessoal, como é essa vida de autor de guias e também como podemos trazer o Caminho de Santiago até nós, principalmente em momentos que não podemos ir até lá. Enjoy!
I'm so grateful and it's a big joy to talk to you. Thank you.
Well, lovely to be here to talk with you. You speak very good English, Andrea.
Thank you. I try. I'm learning.
You're very proficient at it. I'm afraid to say I can't say the same for my Portuguese. I've tried, but I'm not a linguist. I find it very difficult to hear.
Okay. It's hard also to talk like in Portuguese, coração. The people can say heart in English, coração. The pronunciation.
Yes, pronunciation.
It's hard for you.
It's up in the nose. It's difficult.
Yes.
Great. Lovely. Well, I can hear you very well and see you. How wonderful. Great.
Oh, nice. First, I want to tell you that I knew your work because a friend of mine, I did my first Camino in like 6 years ago, and I met a pilgrim from South Africa, and he has a guide about the French way, from yours, and that you wrote. Oh my God!
No, you're doing well.
And then he has to take the bus because he has so many days to do the Camino, and then he forgot his guide with me. So I met you that way. It was like, I don't know, things that Camino do, things like magic things. So I have to have his guide with me. It was wonderful.
Yeah, wonderful. Nice that you say that, Andrea, because it's very true. It's one of the great gifts of the Camino. When we trust life and when we trust the journey through life, then all these wonderful, synchronicities come and give us these gifts, that are meant to be.
Yes. And talking about it, how was your first Camino?
Well, my first Camino was very important. It was literally life-changing. It completely altered my life. I had reached the classic existential midlife crisis. Who am I? Beyond the sort of persona of the busy businessman in Dublin, in Ireland. Where was I going in life? What was it all about? And it didn't bring me immediately onto the Camino, but that year I took off. I found myself in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, not knowing or never having heard about the Camino. So suddenly I found all these people with their shells heading off up the hill. But it was to be some years later that I returned, and I had an interesting, it was a fascinating time for me because big changes I knew were happening. I just didn't know what the changes were going to be or what they would look like. But I was very open at this stage to making change in my life, to, if you like, bringing me wherever spirit wanted to bring me. I was very, very open to being guided by that rather than my ego self. And I went initially off on with a friend, and we left the first day, and I realized halfway through, or not halfway through, but early on in the day, that I hadn't, prepared myself, my my purpose for going on the pilgrimage. So I managed to convince them to come back, and we came back and we spent another night in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. But after, he was a very big sportsman, and I'm a healthy, fit person, but and this was many years ago. I realized he was on a completely different sort of Camino than I was. I was looking for insight into my life's purpose, and he was looking for a physical adventure along the Camino. And I didn't really know what to do, but of course I didn't need to know what to do, because of course my guides knew well what to do. And by the time we reached Logroño 7 days later, in trying to keep up with him, I had developed stress fractures in my legs, in my feet. And the doctors there said, well, you either fly home now, your Camino is over, or you can stay here for a week under our supervision, and we'll test you at the end of the week and see whether we can, advise you going on slowly. So with that advice, I was able to go to my friend and say, look, it's not working. You're going to have to go on, which he did, leaving me on my own, because during that pilgrimage, I found myself walking in silence. Something very huge was happening for me. And I was literally getting this guidance to write these guidebooks, which didn't make any sense to me. Why would I don't speak Spanish, let alone Portuguese. This didn't make sense, but it was very insistent and very clear about the titles and what it would be, and the subtitle. This is a practical and mystical manual for the modern day pilgrim. And from there on, everything was given and written to me. So that first pilgrimage was completely changed my life, and I became, a writer of guidebooks for the Camino.
And your first guide, it was a little time after your first Camino, or no?
No, it was fairly shortly after that. I actually wrote the first one to the Camino Finisterre. I was very taken by Finisterre as a sort of an ending point. Yes, yes, indeed. But my publisher said, look, no, there's not, nobody goes to Finisterre. I have to publish. I have to, these are color press. It's expensive to produce. You have to produce it for the Camino Frances first, and if that works, well, then we'll do the others. So that's what happened. The first guidebook. Then, no, it took a little while to produce it, because interesting enough, my background in Ireland was I was a surveyor. That is, I measured land, and I was very familiar with maps and plans. Not very familiar with computers. I came into the world at a time when there were no computers, Andrea. But I learned to, although my first maps were made by a bicycle, I cycled it then subsequently several times and took measurements on the bicycle wheel, to get all the measurements. So it took quite a few years to produce the maps, although the text was more or less there. And the formatting of it, both the outer, the practical journey, and the sort of inner journey, both those aspects were together as a sort of a reminder to myself and to all of us that we travel two paths simultaneously all the time. And but interesting enough, when I eventually graduated to GPS and the sort of more modern, sophisticated measuring systems, it was amazing how accurate I was with my bicycles. So the books came together then fairly quickly, although it took a while for them to arrive at their present sort of fairly slick formatting. Because I was in the early days, I was very very naive with the computers. I didn't really understand them so well. But now that was a big learning curve, and so here they are now. And seemingly people like the format because they buy them and they want them. So it seems to be fulfilling a purpose and a need that is there.
And now, how many guides do you have published?
Well, there are now seven guidebooks published, and when I started, Andrea, I thought to write 12 because I in my own way, I sort of, sense that there are sort of 12 main caminos to Santiago. Well, of course there are hundreds, but I rather like the idea of the clock face and 12 disciples. So, there are essentially sort of 12 main routes into Santiago, and I thought I would write a guidebook for each one. But then after a few years, it never occurred to me back then, and I never got guidance on this subject, that of course, if they were to be relevant for people, they had to be walked every year. And there's only one of me. So, and also what I do with the guidebooks, I always put in all the alternative routes, because pilgrims, the one thing that really stresses a pilgrim is when they come to a signpost that's got arrows in two different directions. Particularly when nobody tells them if you go left what you'll find and if you go right what you'll find. So so I always write, and indeed I look for alternatives, because my interest is to keep people off tarmac, off the asphalt as much as possible, to keep them on natural pathways. So I've explored many and introduced many ways into the cities along rivers, for instance. Rivers are a wonderful way to approach a city, rather than along a main road. So when somebody does a stage from A to B, I do A to B, A to C, A to D. I do maybe 3 or 4 routes for everybody's one, and then they have to be walked every year to update them. So if there were 10 of me, I couldn't, it would be even a challenge. So and there's also a commercial aspect of it, in that, not for myself, but for my publisher. Publishers need books to sell. So there's very little, I've managed to convince my publisher to print one that's just come out. I only arrived in my hall door yesterday. Day before yesterday, is a book on the Camino de Invierno, the winter route, and the Camino San Andrés, the last days from Orense. So he said to me, well, he said, John, how many people walk the Camino de Invierno? And I said to him, well, I said, not very many. Only 72 started from along that route last year. And he said, well, how do you expect me to write a guidebook if there's only 72 people and none of them are English speaking? And I said, hopefully you're making enough out of the Camino Frances to be able to support it. And I believe that, in a few years' time, if you do, it will become more popular, because part of another thing which I'm, keen to do is to try and find ways to relieve the pressure from, Sarria and on in. It gets very, very busy into Santiago, and indeed beginning to get busy now from Tui into Santiago. Both those routes are taking big volumes of traffic, which has a sort of an environmental consequence, and it's also nice to be able to spread some of the wealth of the pilgrims to the more remote areas, because they're very poor areas, that they can do with the I've sometimes had it described as the pilgrim dollar. Well, actually, it's the pilgrim euro, isn't it? Or what do you have in Brazil? Well, you still have to use euros when you're in Spain. So anyway, that 7 is enough for me.
Yes, and I have to tell you that I used alternative route from here
Yes.
From Finisterre to Liris, next to the sea.
It's
It
lovely, isn't it?
was wonderful. Thank you.
It's one of my favorite routes. I love it there. It is very beautiful. Did you go on then further on to Musia?
Yes, after Liris, I went to Musia also.
You stopped the night in Liris, did you?
Yes, wonderful. Liris, the little beach and the only bar in that. It was so nice.
Yeah, good.
The call of the Camino. What is it that inspired us to go on a pilgrimage? How was your call?
Well, I think many people write to me and tell me that I had one woman write last year to say that she had first heard the expression Camino, an Australian woman, and she heard this expression Camino. She was out at a barbecue somewhere in Australia, and she said in that moment, whatever it was, it just resonated with her, and she knew she had to go on it. And she wrote to me to say that it had taken her 25 years before she actually did it. So it's interesting about this call we get. As I say, I came across the Camino. I'd never even heard of it when I found myself in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. So it didn't call me in that sense at that time. What was calling me was, a spiritual motivation to reorientate my life towards, to include, a spiritual outlook and purpose for my life. And so I needed then time. Of course, the great thing about the Camino is, however we hear about it, when we actually take the journey, it takes the time it takes. I mean, there aren't many places where if you want to, walk from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port or Roncesvalles to Finisterre or Santiago, it's going to take you a month and more. You can't do it in less. So what that does then is it slows everything down. And the first week is, my week is the same as most people's week. The mind was going bump, 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 bump. Did I turn the fridge door off? Did I do the electricity? Did I pay the bills? Did I do this? Did I do that? Then in week 2, that quietens down. By the week 3, I can't even remember the bank manager's name. Everything is sort of, I'm in a completely different place. And then the crucial thing is, and of course, most of us only have 2 weeks, in terms of holiday or whatever. So I really encourage people to beg, borrow, or steal the extra time, because I'm not a medically minded person, but the medics say that it takes 2 weeks just to calm the body down if we have a hectic, busy life. You go out for 2 weeks holiday, all that does is allow you to get back onto the treadmill for another year without hopefully having a heart attack. So the 2 weeks is a sort of a wind down, but then, and the mind winds down in that time at the same sort of pace, but it's in the following weeks where we empty. So it's in weeks 3 and weeks 4 that the mind becomes empty. And when the mind is empty, it can absorb something new. It's almost impossible to absorb a new lesson or new information if our mind is already full of stuff. So the emptying out process, I think, is really important. I know I've digressed from your question, but it's sort of, your question led into this one, because it's about timing. So we get the call, however long it takes us, we then answer it, because we get the call, but how do we answer the call? It's very important to answer it, because if we don't answer the call, well, then we don't get this experience and this journey. So then we, in my own case, the call was fairly obvious. Somebody, this friend of mine, suggested that we went out, and I said, great. And that was, if you like, the second prompting I had to take to go on the Camino. And then at that stage, having said yes fully to it, my guides, St. James, whoever, took over. And because I was ready to hand it over, then they brought me on this incredible journey that led me to what I now do.
And what is the mystical ingredient that turns a long distance hike into a spiritual journey, a path of self-discovery? What is the self, and how does it differ from our ordinary ego self?
Lovely. Well, I think that certainly in my own case, because but also I do have the benefit of a lot of people writing to me, you know, sharing their journey. And of course, when we go on the Camino, we meet other people and they share the journey. So my, you know, my sense is that I've met some of the most skeptical people. Now, I never met anybody who reached Santiago or Finisterre or wherever they went to, never ever met somebody who wouldn't admit that something had happened, something had changed for them along the way. Now, often people find it very difficult to articulate what that is, because by its very definition, a mystery is a mystery. It's very hard to articulate the mystery. That's why it's a mystery. And of course, that mystery is different for each one of us. But if we, you know, what allows me and allows each of us as a pilgrim to discuss these deeper issues, the bigger questions of life and the discovery of the self and the mystical journey, is because by definition, a pilgrimage is a sacred journey. That's what it is. So if you're going on a pilgrimage and you're not including the mystical or the inner journey, it's not a pilgrimage. It can't be. A pilgrimage is absolutely has to include as an essential ingredient the mystical journey. Without it, it's not a pilgrimage. It could be. It doesn't invalidate it in terms of a wonderful experience, but we shouldn't call it a pilgrimage. Now, the self. I only knew my ordinary self, and it was very active. It told me from age that I was a very important person, that it gave me a name, and I could point to it and say, describe who I was. And then that existential crisis I spoke to you about, suddenly it didn't make sense anymore. I was supposedly a successful businessman. At that time, I had all the ingredients of the successful man. You know, that I had the detached house, the car, the lovely children, the lovely wife. Everything was the way it's supposed to be. And yet nothing was the way it's supposed to be, in the sense I was desperately unhappy and unfulfilled. So that was mystery calling. That was my other self calling. That was my higher self calling. Call it what we will. It doesn't really matter. You know, Christ consciousness, higher consciousness, cosmic consciousness. It's the names, but something was calling me beyond the self I thought I was, and in a way, that self, that discovery of that self, became very apparent on the Camino, where I, for 3 days, you know, really left the mundane world completely. You know, people would have called it, my family would have called it, I was having a nervous breakdown. But those who know of these higher selves and mystical journeys knew it very evidently as a spiritual breakthrough into another world, another understanding of the way the world is and what the world is for. So that was that self, I think, it often emerges on the Camino. Why the Camino? It can emerge anywhere. It can emerge when you're having a shower or in a pub. It doesn't have to be on sacred space. But why it often emerges on the Camino is because the Camino is dedicated to spiritual awakening and has done for thousands of years. So for thousands of years, people have walked the Caminos with a high purpose. And on top of that, the Camino, when we're walking it, the complete journey and taking a month or more to walk it, as we mentioned earlier, I'm emptied out. So that self is much more likely to appear in that empty space. Spirit, that spiritual voice, that inner guidance doesn't compete with the ego voice. It's quiet. It's a still small voice within, and it comes in silence. So we have to quiet the mind before it makes itself known. That was my experience, and I think that's the experience of many people.
John, it's so amazing, and you talking about it. I remember that many people says that the real Camino starts at Santiago, and brings the question that we share, bring the Camino home and make it relevant to the transformation of our lives and our world. This is possible?
Yes, yes. I think it's not only possible, but it's only possible in this way. There's a Camino, that starts in Budapest, a very strong pilgrim association there. But it quotes in its manifesto, it's made up of some of the most enlightened, awakened minds of our time. People like Desmond Tutu, that wonderful bishop, the Dalai Lama, people from the arts. It's made up of a whole range of wonderful, modern, new, interesting, thinking, mindful people. And in there, they start by giving the wonderful quotation from Albert Einstein, which says, we cannot solve a problem with the same mindset that gave rise to the problem in the first place. When all is said and done, we need a more evolved consciousness. So, to solve the problems that we have to shift. We literally have to have a paradigm shift in consciousness, because that's the only way we're going to make the shift on the physical level. If we're not going to do what we need to do in terms of social justice or in terms of the environment or in terms of any of the global problems that confront us with the same mindset that gave rise to it in the first place, the competitive dog-eat-dog world, we won't do it. We can't do it that way. It cannot. The problem can only be solved with an uplift and discovering that higher self, that other self. That's the way to shift the world, and the only way to do it. And this brings me to something which I might put in here if I can. I believe the incredible importance of the Caminos to Santiago. The Caminos confraternities that are all around the world. There is no other agency that I know of that literally includes pilgrims from every single nation on earth. Not even the United Nations has every nation as part of it, but the Camino does. People have walked the Camino and walk it regularly. Every year there's never less than 140 different nations, but over time every nation has represented there, and every religion is represented there, and people of no religion, and people of every class, of every color, of every creed, everybody. There is no more eclectic, open body in the world than the Caminos de Santiago. It is fabulous. So therefore, it provides and has one of the essential ingredients needed for this shift in consciousness. The Caminos, I believe, is a very, very powerful forum for the change and shift in the world that we need. And I believe it is playing its part, and it will continue to play its part into the future. It's a very, very powerful force for positive change and the transformation that is needed in the world. That's my view.
I believe in it also. Well, do you have any advice for those who haven't made a pilgrimage yet? And more, I received so many messages this year because so many persons are waiting to go to Santiago. Now it's not possible for us from Brazil to go to Spain or Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
So what can you say for us and for the pilgrim that didn't make yet the journey?
Well, for the pilgrim that hasn't yet gone there but is thinking of going, you know, when travel allows, I would say put as much preparation into the inner journey as to the outer journey. You know, read up some, you know, spiritual material, guidance, whatever your spiritual background is. You know, take time to meditate and to really find a purpose, an inner purpose for walking the Camino. Don't just head out on it without that purpose. The purpose can greatly enhance the efficacy, the power of your journey if you prepare an inner purpose for walking it. So that's the advice I would give. For people who are, you know, have had to change their travel plans and can't get out, I would say, I now experience my life and have done for some years as a journey, as a Camino. I'm on a Camino right now, talking with you. And I'm on the Camino when I go down and to the pub and have a pint of beer. Well, I can't go down to the pub now, it's locked out. But, you know, I don't have to be in sacred space because all space is sacred. So when I have that understanding, which I do now most of the time, sometimes we all do, then I can never not be on the Camino. So I would say to people who are unable to travel over, I would say, find and create a Camino in your own area. You know, make, you know, join up with some friends or colleagues. You know, make an arrangement, take your backpack and go for a week's hike in the wherever you are. Go, you know, make your own trail, because in a way we can't all, the whole world can't keep. You know, I said this. I spent last year. I was in the did a tour of the Australian Camino associations all over Australia. It's amazing how many of these, each country is represented all over, in every town, even in small village towns they have confraternities. And then I was saying, look, they send over 10,000 pilgrims every year, all the way from Australia. And the same thing applies to Brazil. Well, we can't all, you know, by all means, yes, of course you must come and do it, and maybe do the Camino Primitivo and the but you can't keep coming every year to walk the Camino Frances. The planet can't take it. So make and create your own Caminos where you are. And they said, well, have we permission to that? I said, look, the great, wonderful gift, another wonderful gift to the Caminos is that nobody, is not a trademark. The Caminos is there for everybody. Just bring a loving intent And if you have a loving intent, then you have permission. You have permission from God itself or herself if you bring love to it. And there is also, if people are looking for some sort of authentication, the cathedral authority, the Pilgrim Authority in Santiago itself, recently, a couple of years ago, made available the Compostela for people who walked the Camino Inglés from La Coruña, which is only 79 kilometers. And what they have said and given permission to all the associations all around the world, and they say, if you walk and get a certificate signed from your local confraternity in Brazil or Sao Paulo or wherever you live, and get a stamp there with your local pilgrim association, you will then be fully entitled to a Compostela if you fly all the way to La Coruña and walk from La Coruña. Now, the reality is that if you're coming all the way from Sao Paulo, you're not going to just walk for 3 days from La Coruña. But the point is, by saying that you can, and that you can be awarded the Compostela on that account, if you like, authenticates, gives this lovely connection of the Camino out to the world. So you can there in your own country, you can make that available. And you can certify people who've walked some of the route there and have that form part of their pilgrimage when they hit Spain. I think that's lovely connection. So you don't only have permission from God, him or herself, you have permission from the cathedral in Santiago, as far as I know.
Nice, great. John, I have one more question, and if you want to share some more words with us, but I want to know, when you go to some Camino, what is the most important thing in your backpack and the most important feeling in your heart? What do you bring with you?
Okay. Well, I would say probably the two most essential ingredients for me, and ones that I always try and bring with me and make sure are in my backpack, are an open heart and an open mind. And I mean that very directly, because if we go on the Camino and there is any part of us that is closed down, either in terms of prejudice with people that we walk with, or where we want to stay, you know, we have a set mindset of how our pilgrimage is going to be, almost by definition, it can't be a mystery. So I would say to people, keep an open heart, an open mind, and trust, develop trust, because trust is needed in our world. Some of the most powerful journeys I've had are where I've just allowed myself to trust, you know, situations that, well, this isn't working. Yeah, and particularly now with coronavirus, I'm not, you know, of course we all have to follow the rules and the regulations, and we need to do all the things that the local authorities require us to do in terms of social distancing and so on. But we need to learn to trust ourselves and to trust our journey, that it will bring us wherever it brings us. And if that's to experience coronavirus, well, it's to experience coronavirus. It's to experience whatever. Life's the journey, and the lessons we get along the way and what's is put on our path is there for a reason. Everything that happens to us, every hurdle, everything that happens is an opportunity for us to grow, to expand in consciousness, to become more awake, more aware, more loving, more open. And when we can do that, then we will be part of the healers of the world.
Thank you so much. And buen camino.
Bom camino.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right.
See you,
Thank
buen
you.
camino.
And to you too. Lovely to talk with you. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye, Andrea.